but I think in the murder room she doesn't show up. You know, actually there would have been more Cordelias, except the film rights is the problem. It's something that the Baroness and I have talked about. Is that those were the two things that sold differently to television, and she doesn't like the way they did them.
Oh, they did not do a good job on that.
And so the only recourse she had, because that's what happens when you sell, as you know, a story and a character to movies or television, is they get the character in perpetuity, which is why standalone books are what work for movies.
How would I know this, Barbara? Nobody's bought my books.
Well, I will educate you
await.
now. If you ever sell an Aunt Dimity, you have sold her in perpetuity. People who want movies very often are happiest and most successful. It's why Elmore Leonard's books are all movies, because they're all single books, virtually all.
Oh, right.
And so that's it. You know, you sell that book, that character, they make the movie. They don't own anything else that you own. But if you sell Aunt Dimity's Death to the movies, you've lost, you know, any ability to do anything.
I didn't know that.
Film. So what happened was, this happened to Tony Hillerman years ago, which is why there wasn't, the Dark Wind languished away and there wasn't any more movie kind of thing. What happened was P.D. James sold Cordelia and didn't like the way it worked out. So the only thing she could do was simply never write another Cordelia Gray, because if she did, they could go on and film it in some fashion that didn't appeal to her.
hats off to the movie industry.
Made you a happy woman.
It made me a happy woman.
It did. And I think I read, although I'm not entirely clear, this may just be kind of, you know, one of those urban legends I've just acquired, but I think I read that in the murder room it is not going to be Roy Marston. And I can't imagine that. You know, I mean, it's just like...
I had trouble when Penny Downey left playing Miskin. And they put in other Miskins, and it was always, that's not her.
Well,
that's
I mean,
not the
it's
right
kind of
Miskin.
like, if you think about it, Inspector Morse and Colin Thane, that was it. And it was so interesting to me that, and I can't remember which order it was, but I think Colin Dexter stopped writing, and then Colin Thane died, is the way I remember. It could have gone the other way around. But basically, that was the end of the Morses. And the same thing, Leo, you know, McKern has died. Is it Leo McKern? I think it is.
Bailey Rumpole.
Yeah. And that even though John Mortimer is still around, that's it as far as anybody. I mean, you can't imagine somebody else coming in and being Rumpole. It was interesting that they switched from, and I'm going blank on the two actors, in the Dorothy Sayers. They had...
yeah, that worked.
It did, but you know why? It's because
they're different books.
4 Harriet Vane novels with Peter are entirely different books than those kind of silly ass earlier, you know,
that
because
we love.
Exactly.
But it's a very different Lord Peter.
Right, and I think
books.
that's the only reason that was a, you know,
and
successful.
Edward Featherbridge was wonderful.
That's it. Yes,
wonderful.
he was. But so was the...
so was Ian Carmichael.
Thank you. I couldn't remember. You know, I went to see
ask
Ian.
me about Whimsy.
Well, let me tell you what, you will love this. I was in York years ago, it was probably 1986, and at the Royal York Theatre, they advertised a production of Pride and Prejudice.
And Ian Carmichael?
Yes. And now think to yourself, if you're going to go off, you're at the ticket window, and you want to buy tickets to see Pride and Prejudice with Ian Carmichael, what is it that you expect who is it that you expect Ian Carmichael to be in this production?
How old was he?
This was in 1986.
Well, either Mr. Knightley or the father. I mean, he's a character actor. I'd picture him as the father.
Well, he can't be, in fact, Darcy. So.
Oh, Pride and Prejudice. Sorry, I'm thinking of Emma.
I know you were.
I'm thinking of Emma.
Not
Sorry.
Mr. Knightley, but in fact.
In Pride and Prejudice, well, the father.
That's right. He can't be Mr. Darcy, right?
No, he can't.
And so what they did.
Can't be Bingley.
I want to tell you what, it is my favorite, like, theatrical or, you know, performance of Pride and Prejudice, because what they did is they sat him in a chair on the stage, and he simply quoted from memory these enormous chunks of the book. I'm telling you verbatim, and everybody, all the women and all, they all kind of revolved around him. Some of them, you know, were in actual Austen line, and some of them had some sort of written lines or whatever. But the point is that he was the entire, like, the main narrative character. He was the focal point of Pride and Prejudice. Now, for those of us who have seen it, you know, seen Colin Firth, seen, you know, other productions where it's always Elizabeth and Darcy, this was a big transition, but it was wonderful.
It
was
sounds
great.
Just brilliant.
It
mean,
was.
sounds
I loved it,
delightful.
you know, and yet at the same time, it was the funniest thing. And every once in a while, because the Whimsies had, you know, been on.
You would flicker into.
Absolutely. Every
Lord
once in a
Peter.
while, no, he didn't.
Lord Peter would show up.
He didn't flicker. But every once in a while, you know, there'd be this like glaze, as you described. I would have this moment of glaze when, you know, when all like a kaleidoscope went, and I think, oh, Lord Peter, and then back he'd go to Mr. Bennett, you know.
Well, whenever I go to theater in London, there's a game that I invented, which everybody plays, called Place That Face. And you go see, you know, An Ideal Husband.
Right.
And the whole cast, okay, he was in Morse, and he was in, you know, he was in one of the other mysteries, and this person was in a comedy, and that, and if you can name the characters they played in the TV shows, you get extra points.
Extra points.
And so you spend the whole time half listening to Oscar Wilde and half saying, I know her, I know her, I know her. Oh, she played the maid in that episode of such and such.
You know, and one of the things that I found interesting over the years, 15 years now, I've been doing author, you know, interviews at the Poison Pen. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of authors.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Have gone through the store in hundreds of different reader combinations, and yet one of the most common denominators in this whole deal, at almost every event, there is at least one reader who says, who can you see playing character X in the movie or the you know, and I find that so interesting. I mean, it comes up almost every time.
As a rule, are very, very visual.
Yep.
They lend themselves to the visual arts. They're
But casting the book
and
is a big deal.
I'll tell you, it's also, I mean, my joke is that I would want BBC to do my books because they would cast actors.
Right.
As opposed to Hollywood that would cast personalities, and it would be nice to see actors playing the roles. And, you know, Britain, I'm sorry, but their painters and sculptors aren't really the most momentous in the world during this period of our history. The writers, what they excel at is acting. Nobody can touch them for the acting. So if you're, of course, anybody who's grown up watching BBC and reading mysteries, you can't help but say, oh, wouldn't that person be great doing this? Wouldn't that person be great?
Well, I'm not arguing that, but I'm talking about.
I'm not arguing at all.
You know, good. But I meant even, you know, even very American, very thriller books, you know, whatever it might be. There seems to be in readers' minds, some readers' minds, not everybody. It's like they have to translate it to a face and a voice that they are familiar with, and then I think what happens is that gets imprinted. It's also interesting from my perspective is that after you've met an author and talked to them about their work, very often the only voice you hear when you're reading the book. James Lee Burke is a particularly vivid example of that. It is impossible for me to read a Robichaux novel, a Dave Robichaux novel, that I don't hear Jim's voice telling me that, because I've talked to him so often, I've listened to him read so often that, you know, I can't get away from that. And so in a way, I kind of miss the anonymity. I've always thought one of the great things about books was that it was you and the book, and it was a very solitary, a solipsist interaction, and I wanted my own version of the voice, my own face that I imagined. You know, I don't want to substitute an actor or some, and
well,
yet it happens to you.
But if you think, I mean, for most people, the actor is another fantasy too, and
Probably.
So they're bringing two fantasies together. That's fine if it makes them happy. But I've had the experience over and over and over again with very dear old friends when they read my first book. And almost every single one of them came up to me at some point and said they got to either chapter 3 or 4 in Aunt Dimity's death and had to, you know, Lori, Nancy, and separate the two, because while we are very close and our voices are very close, we're not identical. And if you start, it gets out of registration. You know, it gets a little fuzzy until you make that decision to separate them out.